Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prevention and De-Escalation Basics and Beyond. My name is Lisa Finn. I work with the ESE Behavior team. We've been doing this training for years, and so many people have found it really valuable. Definitely some good nuggets to take back to your classroom. You will notice that we are going to spend the majority of the time talking about prevention. And I know a lot of people come here because they want to learn about de-escalation, but don't worry, it will connect, I promise, and you'll see the purpose of why we're spending so much time on prevention when we get to the de-escalation piece.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Jones, and I am a behavior resource teacher, also part of the behavior group along with Lisa, and we are excited to be here with you today and be training with you today. We also have another member of our team joining us. Mark?
I'm Mark Tweeter. I'm also with these rock star ladies, same team. Glad you guys joined us today, and I know you probably have been through this before and you got a nice hold on it, but trust me, there's always something new to learn.
Awesome. Absolutely. Great refresher to get the school year started.
So Lauren's going to share her screen, and I'm going to talk about a little disclaimer that I just want to get out in the open before we get started. So first and foremost, the trainings that we provide cover the span of pre-K students through 12th grade honors, from ESE to Gen Ed and everything in between, okay? This training and the information that we're going to share with you is applicable no matter if you teach little ones or big ones, okay? And sometimes people kind of get stuck when we give an example of something or we show something thinking like, I only see how that works for that age level. And I want to challenge you to stretch your thinking so that even if we are talking about an elementary example and you teach secondary, how does that apply? It might look different, right? Because the ways that we interact with some students change as they get older. The way that we build relationships with them change as they get older. But the core concepts of behavior, and that's what we're going to spend some time about in the beginning, are true whether you're an infant or you're elderly. Okay, it's just might look a little bit different. So I want to say that in the beginning. We're going to give a variety of examples today that cover all ages, birth to 22, which is who our team really services. Like I said, even though we're giving a variety of examples, if you're not sure how that fits in with your population or what you teach, ask us about it, because we are happy to brainstorm that with you. But also stretch your thinking. Try to step outside of the box and think about how it might apply to the kiddos that you teach on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Great point. And just to echo what Lisa was saying, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop us. You can use the raise hand feature. You can type it in the chat box and we'll come back to it as we get to it. But we want this to be interactive. We are here for you guys and we want to give you what you need today. So if you're thinking, but how does this apply to the population that I teach? Or how could I, change this strategy to make it work in my classroom? Don't hesitate to ask us. We are all here to help you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So our goals for today, we're going to start with that welcome ritual, and then we will discuss those basic behavioral concepts like Lisa said. We will be discussing the phases of behavior through the crisis continuum. We will learn the strategies for preventing problem behavior and learn strategies for de-escalation. And like Lisa said in our intro, you're going to see that we spend a lot more time talking about that prevention piece, because we truly believe if we're able to put those things in place, then we'll have to spend less time de-escalating. And then, of course, we'll do our optimistic closing, our attendance verification for those of you that are with us live today, and the implementation for everyone, both live and attending later watching this recording.
Okay, so for our welcome ritual, we're going to do a little thumbs up, thumbs down activity. So Lauren, you can actually stop sharing for just a minute so we can see everyone.
Okay.
And I'm going to read some statements about behavior. If you guys would be willing to turn your cameras on for the moment, so we can see your beautiful faces and your thumbs ups and thumbs down. We would like to know whether or not you agree with those statements as a thumbs up or disagree with thumbs down, or you can type it in the chat box. You're welcome to do that as well. So it's okay if you're on a desktop and you don't have a camera, that's fine. Just type agree or disagree in the chat box. And just really quickly, Lauren, are you hearing me okay? Because our service is not great here today. And I just want to make sure.
Yep,
Okay.
we can hear you. Sound good. I'll let you know.
If it ends up starting to cut out at all, please let me know.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thumbs up. Look, everybody's already practicing their thumbs up and thumbs down. I love it. That was just a little practice round. Okay, ready? So the first statement is behaviors are learned. Do you agree, thumbs up, or disagree?
I have to say it is so nice to see all of your beautiful faces and the participation. Lots of thumbs up, Lisa.
Yes, yes, awesome. Okay, next statement. Candy is the only way to reinforce behavior. Very good. No, no, no. Correct. All right, next one. Getting a student removed from your classroom can be a form of reinforcement. Most people are saying yes. We're going to talk about that some more.
I was going to say we got a few mixed responses on that one.
Yeah. This is just to get your brain going. We're going to talk about this stuff throughout the training. I should use de-escalation strategies during a crisis. Mark says no. Lots of agrees. We're going to get to that today too. Okay, next one. Everyone de-escalates in the same way. No. Awesome. Okay, last one. Knowing your students can help prevent challenging behaviors. Lots of thumbs up and agrees on that one. Okay, very good. So that was our welcome ritual, just getting you thinking about some behavioral concepts that we're going to be talking about today.
All right, and thank you guys for your participation. All right, so we're going to start with behavior basics. Just introducing behavior, the things we talk about when we talk about behavior. So the first thing we want you to think about is the relationship between behaviors and environment. So what is behavior? Behavior is everything that we do. Okay, when we're talking in terms of behavior, behavior needs to be observable and measurable. That means something that we can watch and see whether a student is engaging in that behavior. Okay, and it says down there the skeleton test. So the way that we can determine whether or not a behavior is observable is, can a skeleton do it? Okay, so if we say the student was laying on the floor, well, a skeleton can do that, right? So we need to be able to determine that a little bit more. Tell me more. Do they drop to the floor? Do they leave the classroom? What are they doing? Making it more specific and more measurable, because that will help us determine why they're doing those behaviors, right? Behaviors are not what someone is feeling, but how he or she expresses it, right? So you guys talked about we all de-escalate in different ways. Well, behavior is also communication. So we all also communicate how we're feeling in different ways. So it's important to note a behavior is not she gets angry. What does she do when she gets angry? What does that look like? What are those behaviors? Maybe the student stomps on the floor. Maybe the student is throwing something, right? So making sure that we're defining it in terms that are observable and measurable.
And Lauren, before you go to environment, let's just get some brainstorm in here in the chat box. Type some behaviors. When I say the word behavior, give me an example of a behavior. Eloping, self-injurious behavior, making noises, cursing, yelling out. Good, keep going. Yelling, throwing, biting, crying. Going under the table, good. Give me a couple more. Banging on a desk, self-injurious behavior, very good. Hitting, okay, pause. Are those things mostly positive or negative? They're negative, right? Okay, so one thing to know about behavior is that behavior is everything that we do. Behavior is positive, negative, and neutral. So if it is an action and you can do it, it's a behavior. Right now, I am talking. That is something I can do. That is a behavior. But typically, when we hear the word behavior, we tend to think about the negative things that people do. Okay. I just want to present the idea to you and the information, I guess, that behavior is actually everything you do. So it can be positive things. It can like giving a high five, hugging, doing my work, reading, all that kind of stuff. It can be neutral things that we don't even really think about so much. Like I would say talking is like a neutral behavior, walking, sitting down, things like that. And then all the negative things that you guys had mentioned. So when you think about behavior, remember that it's not just negative things. Okay, Lauren, go to environment.
Absolutely. Great point. All right. So the environment is everything around us that can affect our behavior. Okay. So the environment you're in right now could play a role in your behavior. When we think about the environment, we think about people, places, proximity, and also sensory needs and experiences. Okay, so when we think about the people who are in the environment with your student during that moment, in the cafeteria, there's going to be different people in the environment versus the people that are in the classroom with them. Maybe it's the amount of people that could affect their behavior, right? Or maybe it's the amount of or maybe it's the proximity of those people. And when we talk about proximity, we talk about how close or how far a student is to other people, other places, right? I saw elopement as one of the behaviors. I know on the behavior team, one of the first things we ask if we hear a student is eloping is where is their seat in relation to the door, right? Where is their seat in proximity to the door? So proximity can be places, but it can also be proximity can be how close they are to people, but it can also be how close they are to certain things, right? So thinking about those environments, thinking about our students' needs. So whether an environment is overwhelming, maybe it's loud, maybe it's bright, all of those things can have an impact on the student's behavior. So that last point there says we can change the environment to shape behavior. And that's a lot of what that prevention we're going to talk about is what are those things that we can manipulate in the environment to impact our students' behaviors.
And so just to add on to that, I always have people when we're in live training take their hands and go behavior, environment, and put them together. Behavior and environment are married. And outside of even just the negative or school-based types of behaviors that you're thinking of, we regulate our behavior based on the environment all day, whether you realize it or not. If it's cold in a room, you might put on a sweater. Okay. If the lights are off and you need to see, you turn the lights on. That's a behavior. You're reacting to the environment. Somebody walks in the room right now and says your name, you might turn your head and respond to that person. That's you changing your behavior based on things that are happening in the environment. And all of what Lauren shared is so important because changing environmental variables, like we're going to talk about today with prevention strategies and de-escalation really, is all about how we can shape those more positive behaviors, okay? And how we can help change the environment to support those positive behaviors. So the first thing to know about it are the ABCs of behavior, okay? So all behavior occurs within a chain. Antecedent, behavior, consequence, all connected together. So an antecedent, behaviorally speaking, okay, occurs just before a behavior. It's directly connected to a behavior. And it can be a public or a private event. So I hear all the time, like at least a couple times a week, guys, there is no antecedent. This student just does this out of the blue. No. There's always an antecedent according to the science of behavior, okay? It's just that sometimes we can't see them. So I like to use this example, okay? Oh my gosh, Lauren just took a drink of her water out of nowhere. I hope you guys are chuckling. I can't see you all right now, but that's silly, right? Lauren doesn't just take a drink of her water out of nowhere, okay? Why does she take a drink of her water, guys? Because she's thirsty. Can you see the fact that she's thirsty? Maybe if she said I'm thirsty, right? But if you feel thirsty, you might take a drink of water, okay? The same is true with other things. We have thoughts about things and then they sometimes impact our behavior, right? Okay, I'm thinking, oh, it's hot in here, so I might go get a sweatshirt, okay? Oh, she just got her sweatshirt out of nowhere. No, but when we come to look at negative behaviors, people love to say that there's no antecedent. And it just might be that the antecedent is a private event, meaning it's occurring internally, okay? Public events are things we can see, like presentation of a task, academic demand, somebody laughing at somebody, you said somebody's name. Those are all things that we can see, and then we can say, oh, that came before the behavior. So the antecedent is directly connected to the behavior. It's not something that occurs hours or even days before. It's what happened right before the behavior. And just something to remember is that sometimes those are things we cannot see. Another way to think about it is people are put into situations, or other people or things in the environment trigger a behavior. So you can kind of think about the antecedents like the triggers. The behavior, we already talked about. Anything a person does, positive or negative, basically the person does something. And then the consequence occurs immediately after a behavior. So in behavioral terms, consequence does not mean negative, okay? It just means what happens immediately after the behavior. It's basically how other people or the environment responds to the behavior. And all of those things are really important, because when we can start to look at chains of behavior, we can identify patterns for why we think the behavior is occurring, what's triggering it when we look at antecedents, and we can determine what's maintaining the behavior. The consequences of a behavior are what maintain it. So if reliably every time I go and sit under my desk, it produces teacher come over, redirect me, take me back to my seat, that kind of stuff, then those consequences are helping to fulfill what we call a function of attention. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. So when we can look at patterns of those antecedents and consequences, that's how we can start to decide how we're going to shape that environment, change those things in the environment to help see more of the positive behaviors that we want to see. So whether it's positive behavior, negative behavior, or neutral, you can break it down into these ABC chains.
All right, so here's some classroom examples of what we might see for a behavior. So the antecedent, the teacher asks a question. What's the behavior? The student raises their hand. The consequence, remember this can be positive or negative, the teacher calls on the student. So the student learns, when I raise my hand, the teacher's going to call on me. That consequence is maintaining that behavior, because the student notices the more I raise my hand, the more my teacher will call on me. And that is how I get that attention, right? Okay, so on the right side, you can see another example. Teacher hands out a worksheet. What is the behavior? The student tears up their work. The consequence, the teacher sends the student to the office. Okay, so the student learns, every time I tear up my work, I get to leave the classroom and I don't have to finish that work, right? So this is a perfect example of it works for positive behaviors and negative behaviors. Any behavior can be broken down into those three steps: the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. And we want to look for, like Lisa said, those patterns to help us see what is maintaining that behavior, what is encouraging our students to continue engaging in both those positive and those negative behaviors.
So if you're seeing some negative behaviors emerging in your classroom, really the first thing you could do is take out a piece of paper, write A, B, and C on it, and start to track what you think some of these antecedents, behaviors, and consequences are, to see if you can see some of those patterns. It's kind of like just a quick little first step. You don't have to be doing a behavior intervention to actually do it. You can take ABC data on anything. You can practice on your family members at home if you desire. It's just going to help you start to see some of those patterns.
Absolutely. And a lot of times you as the teacher are going to be part of those antecedents and those consequences, right? You can see in these two examples, the teacher is both the antecedent and the consequence for both of those. So sometimes we are reinforcing behavior, we are encouraging behavior to continue without even realizing it, both positive or negative. So that idea that Lisa had is an awesome way to kind of start looking at that and seeing what is encouraging this behavior to continue in the classroom.
So I mentioned before that the consequences are what maintain a behavior, and Lauren had said that too. So being called on maintains the behavior of raising your hand. Getting sent out of class maintains the behavior of tearing up your work, and the examples go on. The science of behavior says that all behaviors occur for essentially 4 functions, and this is what they are. So when I say functions of behavior, I want you to think about the why the behavior is occurring. And let's just take it outside of this technical jargon, okay, guys? Why do people do problem behaviors? Put it in the chat box. Why do we do any behaviors? They're bored. They want to escape attention. You guys are using some of these words from this slide. Yeah. Let me put it in very simple terms for you because it works for them. So go back to those examples that she just shared. Okay. Raise your hand, get called on. Why am I raising my hand in class? This works for me so I can share my thoughts or I can get my questions answered. Why do I tear up my work? It works for me because reliably when I tear up my work, I get sent out of class. We do behaviors, positive, negative, or neutral because they work for us. Okay. Now let's take it to the technical side of things. In looking at why behaviors are working for us, we do behaviors in order to escape things. Okay. The E is for escape. It removes an undesired activity or interaction. It's how we get out of things. Okay. You do this on a daily basis. If you don't like something that's happening, you have a repertoire of behaviors that are considered socially acceptable and you escape from those activities. What are some of the acceptable escape behaviors? Like if we were in person in this training, okay, and you were like, gosh, I can't stand, I don't want to listen to Lisa talk anymore, okay? What are some of the things you might do in order to escape that situation? Raise your hand, ask to be excused, go to the bathroom. Very good. Mute. Get sick. Hopefully not in the middle of the room, but yeah. Go to the bathroom. Take a phone call. Okay. Those are considered socially acceptable escape behaviors. Now, some of the kiddos you teach might have a different repertoire of escape behaviors that are not considered so socially acceptable. Okay. Same thing with attention. What are some of the acceptable ways you could get attention if we were live together in this training? I mean, we are live, but I mean face to face. Raise your hand. Yes. Say someone's name, right? Wave. Type in the chat. All of those things. But there are kids and adults, really, who have a repertoire of maybe not so desirable attention-seeking behaviors. Why do they do those behaviors? If they produce attention, okay? So why do I curse in class? Because it produces attention. Every single time I curse in class, you turn around and talk to me, and my peers laugh. So it's not considered socially acceptable, but it works for me. I'm looking for attention, and this is the behavior I do to get it, okay? T stands for tangible, which provides preferred items or activities. So it's how we get things, okay? When you want something, you usually ask for it. But maybe, just maybe, you have a hard time with language and communication, and you're not really sure how to ask for something appropriately. And grabbing from somebody else has worked for you in the past. So when I want something, I'll just grab it. That's maybe not socially acceptable. But if it produces the things that I want access to, then access to tangibles could be what's maintaining my behavior. And lastly, sensory. Okay, so sensory provides preferred sensory experiences. It feels good to do. It happens anytime, even when I'm alone, in preferred activities and non-preferred activities. Sensory is the function I want you guys to consider last, because there's a lot of times there's sensory components to behaviors, but it's not their primary function, okay? So just because a behavior looks sensory doesn't mean that it actually is maintained by the sensory function. And we can do lots of strategies in prevention and in de-escalation to help with the sensory pieces, but I think people are really quick to say something looks sensory or is sensory just because it looks like it. So I want you to first consider the E, the A, and or the T before you get to the S. If you're seeing no patterns in the behavior, it's happening across the day in all situations, all settings, all of that, then that's when we're kind of like, okay, maybe a sensory function. I worked with a girl who she had a sensory behavior of giggling. And if you asked her parents, what's one behavior that you want to try to work on? They're like, the laughing, make it stop. Oh my gosh, the laughing. Okay. And most people are like, why? She's a happy kid. But they've been living with the laughing and the giggling her whole life. And we took data on it and we realized, okay, this really is a sensory behavior. The tricky part about it is you don't always know what it is about that behavior that's reinforcing. So is it like the feeling of laughter in her like body as she's laughing? Is it the sound? Is it it could be so many things, the endorphins that are released when you laugh, right? And if we don't know what it is about the sensory behavior, it's kind of really hard to replace it sometimes, because the whole purpose, guys, of knowing the function of behaviors is so that we can teach them a different behavior that serves the same function and is considered more acceptable. So we have to know about functions of behavior. So when we start to look at those ABC chains, we can determine, oh, yeah, I didn't realize that every time the student curses in my classroom, I produce attention. Okay, so now can I teach them to do something different that will still produce attention in my classroom? That's the value of this. So functions of behavior is really important. And I wish they only occurred for one function, but a lot of times behaviors occur for actually more than one of these functions. I would say escape and attention are the two most common in the school setting. Attention probably being the top one. There's attention components with almost all behaviors. And that's tough because it means we have to change how we're giving attention and what we're giving attention for. Lauren, you want to add anything there?
No, I think that was great. I was just going to tie it back into that example that we were talking about before of the student ripping up their paper, right? So they rip up their paper in the classroom and the teacher sends them out. So there's that perfect example of Lisa said, escape and attention, because guess what? Now they don't have to do their work. So they escape that task. They don't get it anymore. And they're getting attention because they have to go somewhere when they're sent out of the classroom, right? So they're getting attention from the principal or the BIA or whoever it is that they got sent to. So that's just another one of those examples where a lot of times we're reinforcing the behavior and we don't even realize all of the different components that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how much training you guys have in behavior, whether you have very little or you have extensive training. I find myself constantly, and I have extensive training in these concepts that we've talked about so far today, okay? When I'm working with teams and with students, I find myself constantly saying, okay, Lisa, what do you know about the basics of behavior? And I go back to these things. I go back to, okay, the ABCs of behavior. What are we seeing here? And really to the functions. And that provides me a starting point always, even in messy, very complicated behavioral situations, to start trying to find a pathway for what we're going to do about it. So we've spent this time today talking about these basic behavior concepts because they're so essential to helping you know what to do in prevention and de-escalation.
Any questions on that before we move on the functions of behavior? Thank you, Meg. All right, we're going to keep going, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so how do we learn behaviors? We learn behaviors through reinforcement. Okay, so anytime, like we talked about, those consequences are reinforcing our behaviors, then we're going to do those. We are more likely to do those behaviors in the future. Okay, so repeated practice strengthens a person's behavior. So the more often we do them and the more often we get those reliable consequences, we are more likely to do those in the future. So let's think about positive reinforcement. When we talk about positive reinforcement, it adds something and makes the behavior more likely to happen again. Okay, so every time a student gets an answer correct, the teacher provides praise. That's positive reinforcement. The student knows each time I get the answer correct, my teacher's going to provide me praise. Okay, another example of this could be a high five or a sticker or anything like that that's added to the environment. So positive reinforcement, we are adding to the environment and the student wants to continue that behavior to get more of that, right? The result is it teaches us how to get things. So how to get that positive praise from the teacher could also be how to get out of the classroom, right? Because I'm adding that extra get out of my classroom and it could make it more likely to happen in the future. Okay, then we have negative reinforcement that removes something from the environment and makes it more likely for it to happen again. So the student misbehaves and the teacher sends them out of the class and now it's easier for them to teach. So let's think about that. Whose behavior was reinforced there, the student or the teacher? Tell me what your thought is in the chat box. Yes, Tracy, both, right? Because the student misbehaves, they got out of the classroom where they didn't want to be, and the teacher is being reinforced because it's easier for them to teach, right? So that was negative reinforcement for both the student and the teacher. It teaches us how to get out of things that we don't want. Okay, so reinforcement, when we hear the word reinforcement, we have that connotation. We think of something positive, right? You get reinforcement, you get to go to Treasure Box. Or for our older students, you get reinforcement, you earn extra basketball time or time with a coach, right? But reinforcement is anything that makes our behavior more likely to happen in the future. So positive, we're thinking about adding something to the environment, so we're getting something from it. Negative reinforcement means something is being taken away. Something negative is being taken away.
Let's talk about a few misconceptions about reinforcement, okay? What it is a consequence because it occurs after a behavior, contingent upon a behavior occurring. It increases behavior in the future. And honestly, guys, it often occurs without us knowing it because it's how we react to a behavior that usually is inadvertently reinforcing it, all right? And it's a principle that you can use to change behavior. What it is not, it's not a bribe, okay? A bribe is giving something prior to a behavior to ensure that it occurs. A reinforcement, go back to the other side, is a consequence that occurs contingent upon a behavior occurring. Reinforcement is not only rewards for good and fun things. It is not only things that cost money, and it is not catch them being good. Okay, so we want you guys to understand that reinforcement has a huge role in shaping behavior. It is how we can change behavior. It is also how we sometimes accidentally create the problem, okay? But being aware of that provides us a solution if we can figure out, oh, I was providing too much attention for that before, and now I'm gonna provide less attention for this and more attention for a more acceptable behavior.
All right, so let's think for a second. What does all of this, we talked about reinforcement and those basics of behavior, what does that have to do with prevention and de-escalation? So take a second and type your thoughts in the chat box.
And if you're watching this recorded, jot your thoughts down.
Knowing beforehand what will happen, you have to be aware of what is actually happening with these interactions. Knowing the origin of the behavior and the students can help us figure out the best ways to de-escalate and prevent the behaviors. Awesome. Reinforcing negative behaviors increases the likelihood that it will continue. These all contribute to prevention, but also understanding the student better. Yeah. Being more self-aware of our own behaviors will allow for more preventative measures. I love that. Reinforcing positive or desired behaviors, including self-regulation, to reduce meltdowns and prevent them. Awesome. Reinforcement will instigate further behavior. You guys are on it. Ignoring negative behavior can help to eliminate them and keeps the teacher from knee-jerk reactions that may be keeping negative behaviors going.
Ooh.
Very good. Knowing in advance what creates behaviors to avoid future behaviors. If we work on prevention, then there's less chances of classroom disruptions. Predicting behavior and getting prepared for the benefit of the entire class. Wow, Lisa, these might be some of the best answers we've gotten.
Seriously, so much better than ours on the next slide.
So our response to that, Mark says, always knowing and understanding your students will help you with all aspects of behavior.
For
absolutely. Sure. And gives the teacher actual control. So what we say is everything. It has everything to do with this, right? Everything that you guys just said. You can't have one without the other. They go hand in hand, and understanding those behaviors and those concepts of reinforcement are going to be your keys when we work on prevention and de-escalation. Okay, so it says right here, understanding behavior leads to behavior change. Okay, so when we understand the behavior, when we think about when and where is it most likely to occur, What triggers it? Looking at those antecedents when Lisa talked about the ABC. So thinking about those A's, what's happening before? Is it always the same thing that happens before? And then the why is it happening? Those common consequences or the functions that we talked about. Okay. So if we're able to look at a behavior and break it down and identify those different things, when and where, what triggers it, and why it's happening, then we can identify ways to alter the environment to prevent it from happening and de-escalate a person when it does occur. Okay. So failure to understand a behavior leaves us chasing our tail and reacting. And that's what we don't want to do, right? Is wait until the behavior happens and then we've got to figure it out and react. If we're able to look at these pieces first ahead of time and find out what is it that makes this behavior more likely to occur, what happens before every time, or what always happens after it, and we can start changing some of those things, then we're going to be able to make it less likely that our students are going to encounter those situations that make those behaviors occur.
So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the phases of behavior. You can go to the next slide. There are really 4 phases of behavior. If you're trained in professional crisis management, then you have seen this before. This is called the crisis continuum. If you're not trained in professional crisis management, no problem, because I'm going to explain it to you right now. We could essentially plot a behavior at any point on this bell curve, okay? Phase 1 is what we call calm and stable functioning. If you know anything about zones of regulation, this would be like your green zone. You're happy, you're calm, you're feeling good, okay? Calm and stable functioning does look different for different people, but essentially the students are on task, they're following your directions, they're doing their work, all of that, calm and stable functioning. Their thoughts are reasonable, right? And we can do our teaching here, okay? This is where teaching really occurs, in calm and stable functioning. So if you're taking notes, I want you to write calm and stable functioning, and I want you to write prevention. And then I want you to write teach. You need to maximize calm and stable functioning to teach all of the skills, all of the strategies that you can to your students, academically, communication-wise, social skills, behaviorally, all the strategies, the coping strategies, all that stuff, that is what is occurring in calm and stable functioning. When a student enters pre-crisis, that could be considered the yellow zone. Basically, there's some type of unresolved conflict that's happening here, okay? The student is triggered by something, okay? We start to see some off-task behavior, potentially. We might see pacing. We might see the hood go up, the headphones go in. We might see some non-continuous like aggression, like, you know, a bang on the desk or a curse word or something like that. This is pre-crisis. Pre-crisis, again, looks different than for every person, okay? And unfortunately, some of our kiddos actually live in pre-crisis. It's that fight or flight mode, okay? And that can have an impact based on things that have happened to them in their life. So it can be impacted by trauma. It can be impacted by lifestyle, things like that. So if you have kids that kind of live in pre-crisis, you want to maximize their lowest level of pre-crisis for that teaching and prevention work. So if you're taking notes, I want you to write pre-crisis, and this is where you're going to use de-escalation strategies. So pre-crisis, this is where we use de-escalation strategies. What de-escalation strategies, you ask? Thank you for asking. I'm glad you're wondering that. It actually is all the stuff you've already taught in calm and stable functioning. We are not going to bust out new things here, okay? This is why prevention is so important, guys, because you have to teach it in calm and stable functioning. You have to do the work in calm and stable functioning. You have to do the teaching. You have to do the explicit instruction so that when a student is in pre-crisis, you can utilize de-escalation strategies, which essentially consists of reminding them of the stuff they already have been taught and that they already know, and assisting them through that process so they can move as fast as possible from pre-crisis back to calm and stable functioning. Now, at the top of our bell curve, we see crisis. In zones of regulation terms, this would be the red zone, okay? In crisis, and this was a statement we talked about earlier, your focus is safety. So, right, crisis, safety. Okay. Now, can you use some de-escalation techniques in crisis? Yeah, but I want you guys to think about a kid, picture it in your head, at the tip top of their meltdown. Are they hearing you when you're like, okay, we're going to take some deep breaths? No, they're not. Okay. So your focus here needs to be safety. When a kid is in crisis, our focus is safety. Okay. Safety for who? Safety for that particular kid or individual, could be an adult, maybe that's in crisis even, right? Safety for the others that are in the environment, and safety for you who might be assisting that person in a crisis. All right. So crisis is not, we sometimes infuse some de-escalation stuff within crisis, but for the most part, you're going to do your de-escalation work in pre-crisis. And then post-crisis is stage 4. You're going to notice that post-crisis is not at the same level on the bell curve if we went straight across as calm and stable functioning. I want you to think about after you have been super upset, okay? If I've just had a meltdown or a kid's just had a meltdown and they've been super upset, they're kind of coming down from that and they're in post-crisis, they're like still a little bit heightened. It's kind of a delicate spot, right? Because I could go to calm and stable functioning or I could go right back into crisis pretty easily. Okay. So post-crisis is where we might be considering the blue zone. And Mark says you go slow here. You do. You want to reintegrate things slowly. You want to be aware that sometimes after a crisis, students are very tired, maybe embarrassed. Maybe they just need some time. Okay. So in post-crisis I want you to write down post-crisis, slow reintegration. So understanding where a behavior is falling at the current moment is going to help you know what to do when it comes to prevention and de-escalation. And we're going to be focusing more on the calm and stable functioning and pre-crisis side of this today in prevention and de-escalation. And we're going to spend a majority of our time on calm and stable functioning because that's how you know what to do in de-escalation. You're on mute, Lauren.
Thank you. So we're going to start with prevention, that very first step, and think back to that crisis continuum. Who remembers? Put it in the chat box. What stage are we teaching prevention in on that crisis continuum? Calm and stable functioning. You guys are on it. Awesome. All right. So the golden rule of prevention, number one thing, maximizing relationships. Okay. Relationship building is the number one key to preventing and de-escalating problem behaviors. Okay. So let's stop and think about it for a second. Who do you want to learn from? When you're upset, who do you go to? Who are you going to accept help from? The people you have relationships with, right? Think about that conversation. How are you doing today? You're going to answer it a lot different from someone that you might just be passing on the street. You might say, oh, I'm okay, or oh, good, versus a friend who asks you, how are you doing today? You're going to be much more willing to tell them the truth, right? Whether it's good or bad, telling them all the good parts of your day or all of the hard parts of your day, okay? So maximizing those relationships. Many of our students just want to know that you like them. So let's stop here for a second and think about what are some things that you already do in your classrooms to build relationships with your students. Having student conferences, awesome. Greeting them individually, I love that. What else? Showing interest in their hobbies, yes, so important. Holding conversations with them, awesome. Playing ball during earned reward time. I love that you said earned time. Love, love, love. Conversations about things that they like, yes. Getting to know them, talking to them about their interests. Spending time with small groups during recess, meeting with each at least once a week. I love that. Learning games, morning meetings. So you guys already have these tools in your toolbox. These are things that you're already doing to get to know your students better and build those relationships. Mike, I love that. Talking to them outside the classroom, checking in with them individually. Okay, so these are things that we want to focus on, because we already talked about when we know our students well and we know the behaviors well, we're able to de-escalate them faster, right? So if we know our students and we have that relationship with them, we're going to be much more able to assist them when they get into those situations, because we already have that relationship and they're already willing to learn from us and talk to us. Anything you want to add on that, Lisa?
No.
Awesome ideas, guys. So a lot of this is stuff that we already talked about. A lot of you guys already do these things. Meet them at the door, greet them by name and with eye contact, being fully present during conversations, showing an interest or asking questions about things that they like, having lunch with a small group of students, incorporating things they like into the classroom. And this one's huge, guys, treating students with respect. And we already did that activity. You guys had some awesome ideas in the chat box.
The importance of prevention. This is just a quote that we really like. With an emphasis on prevention, the development of pre-crisis and crisis behaviors is minimized. So more prevention equals less problem behavior and less need for de-escalation and crisis management. In the basics of prevention, we want to project competence, confidence, and humility. Be prepared, use a confident tone, and admit your mistakes. Know your students. Know their likes, their dislikes, their triggers, and their glimmers. We also want to be trauma-informed. So focus on what has happened to the student versus what is wrong with him or her. If you haven't had any training on trauma, there are opportunities out there to definitely get trained on trauma, being trauma-informed. And it really is worth your time because understanding different types of trauma and ways that people respond can help provide some insight into their behaviors and their beliefs and their attitudes about a lot of things. And I think can help you be more successful, especially with some of your most difficult students who have experienced a lot of trauma in their lifetime. I really wish it's something that kids didn't have to experience at all. But unfortunately, a lot of our kiddos have been through quite a significant amount of trauma in their little short lives. And so being trauma-informed is really important. Tanina says, What Happened to You is an excellent book. I will have to take a look at that. Thank you for that recommendation. We have another training that's occurring next week called Behavior Extravaganza. And there is a segment in there where we are going to provide some training on trauma. And there's other opportunities out there as well. So if you haven't had much training in this, or honestly, guys, I cannot attend enough trauma trainings just to get to know more and be reminded of certain things. It definitely is important to keep fresh in your mind, just like the behavior basic stuff is. And then be a reflective listener. Being present is important. And then providing structure in your classroom. So classroom management is huge. Clearly define rules, routines, and expectations, preset consequences for behaviors, being consistent, following through. So those are all like the basics, no-brainer stuff about prevention. But guys, it's really important. It's the foundation of your prevention that you do in the classroom. I wonder how many of you guys connected your relationship building with students to being the #1 key to preventing problem behaviors in your classroom. Have you thought about that before? Or are you just now making that connection, right? It's huge. Relationship building is huge. These basic concepts are huge and very key.
Absolutely. And Mike made a great point. Remember what it was like for you at different times of your childhood. So being able to connect back, that's an awesome way to connect with your students too. But then like Lisa said, remembering that some of us have had some of them have had experiences that none of us have had. So that's kind of where that trauma-informed ties in, right? So thinking about how I would have reacted in those situations or how our students are experiencing different things is so important. All right, so prevention strategies. We've already talked about it happens during calm and stable functioning. So teach, teach, teach. You're going to hear Lisa and I say that over and over again because it can't be said enough. Okay, this is where we are teaching. When our students are calm, when they are in that stable functioning mode, that's when we teach because that's when they can focus and listen and take in all of this information, right? So what are we teaching? We're teaching functional skills. We're teaching communication skills. How do they communicate those things that they want and need? Social skills, academic skills, and replacement behaviors, right? So remember when we talked about those functions of behavior, and Lisa was saying, okay, we know that this gets me attention, but we need to teach them a better way to get attention, a more appropriate way to get attention when I'm in the middle of teaching a lesson, right? So this is the time for teaching those things. We want to model expectations, okay? Modeling for our students what we want them to be doing. So when we're first teaching, we're going to show them how to do it, show them what it looks like, okay? Do it alongside them and then provide feedback. So if you're asking them to do a new behavior, you might say, okay, I love the way that you did X, Y, Z. Next time, let's try this, right? Let's think about raising a hand. So they raise their hand, but they also called out the answer as they're raising their hand. Okay, so I'm going to provide some feedback. Thank you so much for raising your hand. Next time, let's raise your hand, wait to be called on, and then tell me what you have to share, right? Specific praise for expected behaviors. This is super important. Okay, we want to avoid just the good job or the high five, right? Exactly what they did that we are expecting of them. So I love the way that you raised your hand and waited for me to call on you. I love the way that you came into class and started right away on your morning activity, right? Being very specific about what it is that they're doing. Meg says make it personal. Absolutely. Use their name in that specific praise and feedback, okay? Kids love to know what they're doing and very specific about what they're doing. And what also benefits is the other students in the classroom, because then they hear you praising other students and saying, oh, he got praised for doing X, Y, Z. I'm going to do that too, right? Okay. And then this goes back to what Lisa was saying on the previous slide, providing that structure, but providing those choices as well and the consistency. Okay. So our students need to know that we mean what we say. So if we are offering a reward or if we're saying that there's going to be some kind of consequence, we need to follow through with those things. All right, environmental support.
We're going to do.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. We're going to go through a few different categories of prevention and prevention strategies. The first one is environmental supports. And then when we get into supplemental supports, we're going to go into some of the things a little bit more specifically. So environmental supports refer to a question you could ask yourself is how you could alter the physical environment to support positive behaviors. So things like noise level, lighting, seating location, workspace. Some kids need a larger workspace. Some kids need a more defined workspace. Also, how your classroom is set up. Okay, could you change the layout of your classroom to help support more positive behaviors? If you're noticing certain kids together isn't a good thing, change up those things. Also, proximity to other students, staff, door, etc. So looking at your physical layout in your classroom is really a good starting point. They're the easiest changes to make in your classroom, and they can prevent a lot of problem behaviors from occurring. And this needs to be revisited quite often throughout the school year, because you might need to alter things as the school year goes and as dynamics change throughout the year.
All right, so supplemental support. So we're going to go into each one of these, which supports might be needed to help elicit the use of expected behaviors. So in addition to making those changes to the environment that Lisa talked about, what else can we add into the environment, those supplemental supports to assist our students? So we'll talk about each of these: visuals, controlled choices, reinforcement systems, temporal supports, and access to needed materials. So let's talk about those visuals first. Visual supports. When do we use them? All day long. Right? Okay. A lot of times we hear the word visuals and we automatically think about pictures, maybe something that's made on Boardmaker or a cartoon, but visuals are anything that is an added visual support. So something that you can look at, right? That we're adding to the environment for our students. Okay. So let's think about our Google calendars, which I'm sure all of us got a lot more used to using during this past year with the pandemic and all of the virtual learning, and using those calendars, right? That is a visual support. That is something that we as adults are using as visual support, okay? A daily schedule, a checklist, all of those things. So we're using them throughout the day. We use them to learn new concepts. We use them to communicate, to help us deal with stress and new environments. So think about that picture of the bathroom there with the men and women. When I'm in a new environment, how do I know which bathroom to go in? I look for the sign that says where I need to go to the restroom, right? To deal with change, to help us become independent and to transition. So everyone uses visual supports daily. Sometimes we need them a little, sometimes we need them a lot. So depending on our students and their specific needs, the visuals that they need are going to look different, but there are lots of different ways that we can add small things to our students' environment to help support those concepts. So these are some examples of some classroom visual supports. The first one talks about class rules, right? So it's the class rule and also a little visual to help keep them reminders about what it is that the expectations are. Okay, we can also use direction cards like that example in the middle where it says the directions of each thing they're supposed to do in a step. And the last one shows an example of lineup rules. So these are the expectations, maybe something you review before you go into the classroom or into the hallway with your students.
And remember, visual supports don't always have to have pictures on them and look elementary. Okay, visual supports can just have words. Visual supports can be a list of things. Okay, you should not stray away from visuals because you teach older students because they need them too. You need them and they need them too. It also helps you be able to talk less. I think, a lot of times we're relying on teachers to have to say so much, but if you put up a visual of, okay, here's your expectations, here's your assignment expectations, you can just refer to that. Let that do the teaching for you sometimes so we can talk less and let them be more independent and teach them how to rely on those visual supports.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I've seen more and more in classrooms, teachers using PowerPoints for those, classroom rotations or classroom expectations. When I come in, these are the 4 things I have to do, and they have it up on the screen so the teacher doesn't have to stand there and say over and over again, right? First, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Then you can work on these math problems. It's there, and that way you can pull your small groups or you can go help individual students, and the expectations are there. The important thing, just like everything else we've talked about, is these things need to be taught, right? So I can't just hand a student a visual or put a visual up on the computer screen and expect that my students are going to know how to use it or know what to do with it, right? So it might need a little bit of an explanation, just read through the things and explain to them what we're doing, or it might need something, where we practice and use it often. But those visual supports can be so beneficial, and like Lisa said, reduce the amount of time that you have to spend giving those reminders over and over again. So these are just a couple more examples of some visual supports. These can be used as a whole class or also for individual students. Okay, so a first then visual. So a student that needs more frequent reinforcement, more frequent breaks, this can be used visually and or vocally, right? We can just tell them, first you need to do your reading, then you can have Legos. Okay, this can be used in any classroom verbally as well. So first, let's get your reading done, and then you can get on the computer and have a reward on YouTube, right? This one on the right is controlled choices, so giving students a choice board. So these are the things that are available to you. It's important to note, make sure what is on the menu is available. So what we don't want to do is provide a choice board with different choices, and then the student chooses computer, and there's no computers available, right? So making sure when we are providing those choices that whatever choices are there are available. A great way to ensure this is to do something like Velcro, so you can switch the choices out, or even something digitally that you can display on the board, and the choices change, but you know that you're not ever providing anything that's not available.
Now, these are maybe some little kid choices, right? But you can provide controlled choices to adults as well. So if we were doing this training, face to face, I might say, all right, guys, you guys have been super engaged. I really appreciate your participation. We're going to have a little earn time right now. So what would you like to do? Go on your phone or play a group game together. And then you guys could vote. Or whoever wants to do each one could do each one. So I could provide that menu. I could write it on the board, something like that. There's also visual supports for strategies, which are really important. So if you're teaching the strategy of how to calm down, having a visual of that with the steps of how to do it, and referring to it as you teach it is going to allow you to fade yourself out of that calm down process eventually, and let the visual be there as the guide. If you don't ever use the visual, then the student might never be able to do it on their own. So this is going to promote independence. You need the visual when you're initially teaching it. You need to refer to it. Then they know how to use it when you're maybe not standing with them. The middle picture is some anger choice cards. And these are things that are examples of things that will be available to you after this training through email if you're on live, or if you're watching the recorded version. They are posted in the additional materials, notes, and attachments section in e-learning so that you have access to them. But anger choice cards have different kinds of strategies on them. So what can I do when I'm angry? I might not use all of those choices. You can change them out. You can change the pictures so that it has kids that look more like the students that you teach. Maybe you change out some of the choices, but essentially you're going to teach each of those. And then when a student is angry, you can come over, show them the choices. They might be able to make a choice and help calm down. So that's a good visual support for that. I've seen teachers cut those up and put them on one of those little rings that's kind of attached to your badge, and then you can kind of just hand the ring to the kid, kind of like what you see over here on the right side, but it would have those strategies on it. I also see lots of teachers use these visual supports. Stop, look, come here, stand up, sit down, that kind of stuff. That's on this ring on the right. So that's really good. Guys, we do so much verbal prompting of our kids, and visual supports are huge because it lets you take some of the verbal away, okay? We don't want to always have to say to our kids, sit down, sit down. Show them the card that says sit down, okay? And you'd be surprised how effective that is. Then you can keep teaching and talking about other things, and your class isn't just hearing you constantly giving corrections, okay? So rely more on those visual supports and strategies for that. We also have visual supports for communication, so requesting and protesting. In the virtual setting, you could use the mute, unmute. We did that a lot last year. Hopefully we won't have to do so much of that again this year, but just in case I left it there, thumbs up, thumbs down, stuff like that. And, all behavior communicates something. So a lot of the times what we're doing is when we're teaching new behaviors is we're teaching better ways to communicate. So having visual supports for that is going to be really helpful for some of our kiddos.
All right, so some temporal supports. So this is for our students that need support, and this can be based on the whole class. This can be for individual students. If an individual student needs help with knowing how long they need to do an activity or what the expectation is for that activity. So there's lots of different ones on here that you can use in your classroom. The first example on the left-hand time is that time timer, and we could tell a student or a whole class, we have 20 minutes to complete this activity. They can see, and when that red runs out, a little timer sounds so they know time's up, right? Those kitchen timers down at the bottom, and you can also see them hanging on rings all the way to the right. You can get those from the dollar store. Those are some of my favorite things to hand out to teachers as reminders, right? We can use this if we're using it for a de-escalation time, right? So you have 3 minutes. If you take deep breaths, do what you need to do, and then come back, right? Or giving the students reminders of, there's 3 minutes left before we need to clean up. That kind of thing. There's lots of different ways that you can use those temporal supports. Okay, the clock at the top, this one is different activities colored in for different times of day. So this one I think specifically is used for after school activities. So you can see from 4 to 5, it's yellow. So they know that's my playtime. From 5 to 6, it's homework time. Okay, so something like that you could use in your classroom and color code your different times of your day, right? So from 12 to 1, we do reading, and they know that's this specific color. That might help with some of our older students who are able to tell time, but still need that reminder of how much time they have left or what that expectation is. Okay, and then down at the bottom, you see that sand timer. Sand timers are great for, those short amount of time, 2-minute, 3-minute timers of setting expectations. So whether it's you need to get something done in that amount of time, or you have that amount of time before you need to come back to the activity. And these are just some of tons and tons of examples. If you go on Amazon, there's lots of different, new timers that have lights and different sounds and different things like that. But what we're saying is you don't need to spend money because there's tons of stuff that's already out there for you. The link to the right that you'll get when you get this PowerPoint goes to online timers, and there's tons of different online timers that you can display on your board for the whole group, so that they know how much time is left in an activity or how much time before it's time to change to a new subject or a new group rotation. But there's lots of different ways that you can give your students those expectations, and that helps reduce that anxiety, right? Because then I know what's coming next, I know how much time is left, and there are those reminders for me right there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about reinforcement systems. Remember, behaviors that are reinforced will increase in the future. We talked about that as a basic behavioral concept earlier in this training. So now let's talk about some systems you can put in place to do reinforcement in your classroom. Okay, take the time to invest in a system to consistently reinforce expected behaviors in your classroom. What gets reinforced will get repeated. So you want to make sure that you're intentionally reinforcing the behaviors that you want to see in your classroom. Always consider natural reinforcement first. So what do I mean by that? If a kid asks for a break, they get a break, not necessarily a goldfish. You can pair it with the goldfish, cool, but if the kid asks for a break, give them a break, right? Raise your hand, you get called on. That's considered natural reinforcement, okay? Some students require more than just natural reinforcement to strengthen their behaviors though. So there's a couple different types of reinforcement systems. We have immediate reinforcement systems like food reinforcers, social praise, quality time. And then we have delayed reinforcement, which refers to things like behavior contracts, point sheets, and token systems. So that's where I'm working towards something and eventually I get it. And you want to incorporate choices whenever possible, okay? Kids and anyone really thrive on having choices. So you don't want to incorporate too many choices, but have them a choice, give them a choice. What are we working for? And then a contingency for how we're going to get to it. So here's some sample reinforcement systems. On the left, you see something like a point sheet, okay? And there's so many different kinds of point sheets out there. You can Google. I will send you one that I believe looks similar to this at the end of this training. But basically, you want to make sure on any kind of point sheet or behavior contract that you have a couple behaviors that you're targeting or working on, okay? And then you have a very clear way to know whether that point was earned or not. And then you have certain times of the day where points can be traded in for earn time for those reinforcers. On the right side, you see an example of what would be considered a token board, okay? So this is where maybe the student doesn't need immediate reinforcement, but we're trying to build to something like something more delayed, like a point sheet or something like that. So I use a token board. I can deliver those tokens as fast as I want, and then they can earn. So it's showing them I don't get it right away. I have to wait for it a little bit, but as soon as I earn this, I'm going to earn whatever the thing is that I'm working for. And how many tokens you provide and how often they're provided is really going to depend on the student. But it's the first way to start introducing delay of reinforcement, which is really important because you guys don't want to always have to be providing immediate reinforcement for everything. Okay, now, token boards, we don't see so much in the secondary setting. I see things more like point sheets and behavior contracts. Doesn't mean you can't use a token board, but I would say I do see these more used in the elementary setting than in the secondary setting. We also have virtual token boards, okay? So things that you're working for, you can use tokens of a topic that a kid is interested in. So if a kid likes pirates, then make the tokens be pirates. You can pull this up and have it something that's shared with them, and then you just move the tokens up. Then it's maybe not materials that are out all over the desk. We also use virtual point sheets a lot of times in the secondary setting, which are really helpful because it can be shared across multiple teachers and they can just insert their points for the day. But regardless, you want to remember, whether you're using a point sheet or a token board, that you have those specific behaviors that you're working on building. So we don't want to just give tokens for anything, okay? If I'm working on trying to build in-seat behavior and starting my work right away, then that's what I need to provide the tokens for. If I can get tokens for like everything throughout the day, or it's random, then you're not really truly reinforcing a behavior. So I think that's one of the number one mistakes I see people make, is that they don't really have a specific point for what their tokens are for. And that is, then we sometimes don't see as much improvement in the behavior, because it's reinforcing kind of like all these different behaviors randomly.
All right, so this is a group contingency, same kind of thing, but instead of for an individual student, it can be used for a group of students. So a marble jar can be used, same thing, you still want to set that expectation. What is it that we earn marbles for? So if we're working on walking in a line in the hallway, then maybe I would use the marbles for that. You can also, maybe for a secondary classroom, maybe it's everyone completing their homework, right? And turning it in on time. So using marbles for that. And then you as the group can set, what do we earn when we fill up the marble jar? So maybe it's, extra time doing a preferred activity, or maybe it's a pizza party, or whatever your group decides. But that way it's that group contingency, so they're all working together. And here are some virtual classroom awards, again, that you can access when we send out those PowerPoints to you. So social supports. What social skills or supports are needed to help elicit the positive behaviors or the use of replacement skills? So what do we need to teach our students to be able to do in these situations so that they are able to use those replacement skills? So the facilitation of self-regulation and self-management strategies. So we are going to need to explicitly teach some of those strategies. Maybe it's breathing strategies, or what I can do when I get to a certain place and I'm upset, right? Teaching those coping skills. And also it's assistance with communication skills with peers and or adults, right? Let's think about ourselves when we get into frustrating situations, or we've had a hard day. Sometimes communication may be harder for us. The same is true for our students, regardless of their level, right? Regardless of grade level or age. Sometimes it's harder to communicate when you're in those situations. So we may need to take the time to explicitly teach the communication. When you're feeling this way, this is how you can communicate with me, whether it's verbal or whether it's using visuals and showing you where they're at, but giving them those different supports to be able to communicate that. So one example of this is social stories. So teaching students what's expected in different social situations. So in the story on the left, you can see the example of keeping hands to myself. And it says, keeping my hands to myself is important. People don't like it when I put my hands near their face, even if they're trying to be nice. So it gives the perspective of other people. How do other people feel when I engage in this behavior? Then there's some replacements. Instead, I can give a high five, a fist bump, or a handshake. People like that a lot better. When I want someone's attention, I can say high five or handshake, or put my hand out and handshake. This is how I can get someone's attention and show them I like them or want to be around them. And then there's some visuals, right? So the social story talks about, how do people feel when I respond this way, and what are some better ways that I can respond, okay? So on the right side, we see a more secondary version, doesn't necessarily have pictures. Sometimes our class sits on the carpet for the whole group. We sit on the carpet and listen to stories for group lessons. My friends are trying to listen so they can enjoy the story. It may be hard for them to listen if someone is not sitting still, right? So again, we're talking about how it impacts those other people. What is the replacement behavior? I will try to sit still during our time on the carpet. If I'm having trouble, I can ask my teacher for a quick move break so I can get out my extra energy. If I show my teacher my move break card, she will know I want to take a move break. Then she will let me take a move break. Okay, so social stories are something that can be a quick way to teach that expectation. There are tons and tons of social stories out there, but you can also create your own. So what I like to do is go out there, see what's out there, and then tailor it to fit that student or fit that specific situation. Using pictures of, them in the social story sometimes adds to buy-in. And anytime I work with secondary students, including them in writing the social stories, because they should be a part of it, right? So that they feel like they have input, or they can tell you how might people feel when I respond this way and X, Y, and Z. Lisa, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have used social stories in your classrooms or with the kids that you work with, but you can literally have a social story for anything. Okay. I've used social stories effectively for kids exhibiting school refusal and not wanting to get out of the car in the morning. That's probably something you guys are going to encounter this coming year because some kids have not been on campuses for a while. So, I like to add pictures of them, in their stories, pictures of their schools, of their friends, things like that. I think Tracy just said that too. Adding their picture builds relationships. Yes, making it with them. So you can look up social stories literally about anything, and any topic that a kid's having a hard time understanding is good for a social story. I had a kid in my class and we had a social story about accepting corrections because he hated to accept corrections from me, even if they were constructive. If I was correcting him, he did not like it. So we made a social story together. And when he'd get upset, I'd say, go read your social story. And he'd go to his desk and he'd be all upset. And he'd be reading his social story. And you literally see him like calm down the whole time. And if I knew I was going to have to correct him because we were doing some kind of lesson where I thought a correction was probably going to come, I used it proactively where I said, okay, before we work together, read your social story real quick and then come sit with me and then we're going to work together. And then as we did, I might say, I'm going to give you a correction. I want you to remember what's in your story that you read before you came here. And then we tied some reinforcement to being able to accept those corrections, which was really cool. So you can use them for anything, any age level. They're going to look a little bit different, but any kind of social situation that a kid's not understanding, you can make one of these for. These are some social supports for self-regulation. Size of the problem is one of my most favorite things to teach. And kids need this instruction, guys. Okay, we see kids that are having huge upset reactions to very tiny problems. So what you do when you teach size of the problem is you teach them first to categorize problems. You don't have to use a 5-point scale. You can just do big problem, small problem. You could do small problem, medium problem, big problem. Or you could use all 5 points on the scale. And what I used to do with my kids is I would give them like little scenario cards. So it was out during calm and stable functioning, right? This is when we're teaching this. And I had them categorize the problems. And then most importantly is not that they can categorize the problems, but they can identify the type of reaction that they should have for each size of the problem. So a small problem or a very tiny problem should have a very tiny reaction. I typically teach, oh man, when it comes to something like that, okay? A huge problem, we need to let them know if something's a huge problem, it's okay to have a huge upset reaction to it, guys. That's all right, because it's a huge problem. They need permission to have a huge upset reaction to a huge problem. And what you'll notice is that most kid level problems fall in the small, medium size range. And therefore, we have to teach them explicitly now how to have a small and a medium size reaction. This makes a huge difference for them. Now let's talk about how that looks with de-escalation. Now I'm escalated, but I've already taught this, okay? I can say to a kid, is that a big problem or a little problem? And they could say, little problem. Okay, let's practice a little reaction. I model it, they try it. That's how you can quickly then use that in de-escalation. But if I didn't already teach that size of the problem stuff, how am I going to get to that when there's a big upset reaction? And I just have to share this story because I always do when I talk about size of the problem. I'll never forget it. I had this kid in my class. We went through all this. He understood it, no problem. Could not stand getting out in a game on recess, like could not handle it. So I come out one day, he's on recess and I see him sitting on the side, he's pouting. And I'm like, hey bud, what's going on? He's like, I got out in the game. And I know you're going to tell me that that's a small problem and I'm having a huge reaction, but this is a big problem to me and I'm going to have a huge reaction to it. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. If you want to have a huge reaction, but understand the consequence for that is people probably don't want to play this with you anymore. And they might start leaving you out of games. So as another teaching scenario, he perfectly understood it and he perfectly communicated to me that, I think it's a huge problem, so I'm going to have a huge reaction. And I took that opportunity in a teachable moment to say, no problem. But here's the consequence to that. Okay. So self-regulation skills are huge. You can use an anger thermometer for it too. It's kind of essentially the same thing that's in the middle. And then on the right side is social behavior mapping, which I love for debriefing with kids. Okay. A social behavior map essentially gets a kid to look at what happened, how that made me feel, how that made others feel, and then what you're going to do about it in the future. There's different types of social behavior maps, but you can look at social behavior maps, and you should, with positive behaviors and also negative behaviors, so kids can see how their behaviors cause other people to have thoughts about them, which impacts what happens as a result. Okay, so social behavior mapping is huge. If you guys are crisis intervention teachers, I know we have several on here. If you're a guidance counselor, if you're a behavior intervention associate, if you debrief with kids, BHPs, social behavior mapping, guys, is something you should be doing with your kids. Okay, it is huge. When you're meeting with them to debrief, literally laying this out with them is so impactful. I used to do it with my students often, and it really helps them to kind of see their behavior laid out and see what they can do better about it again in the future, I should say.
Awesome. So these are just a couple more social supports. So lazy 8 breathing. So the lazy 8's there, and you model for your students and teach them. You start where the fingerprint starts, and you model for them breathing in and out, going around the lazy 8. And then those anger choice cards that we saw earlier in the presentation. So what are some of your favorite coping strategies to use either for yourself or that you practice with students in your classroom? Starfish breathing using your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Count and breathe, counting to 10. Great. Balloon breathing. I've seen a lot more of balloon breathing this year.
Mm-hmm.
Counting to 10 backwards, starfish breathing, bubble breathing, customizing the lazy 8 for kids, helping Lightning McQueen make it around the track. I love that, Tracy. That's awesome. Calm step cards, visualizing a calm place. Had a student who we used to blow out the candles. Yep. Belly breathing from Sesame Street. Awesome. Grounding.
Good.
Awesome.
And with older kids who might not want a lazy 8 visual, I've seen where you teach them to lazy 8 breathe in their hand. So you just teach them to like actually take their hand and they like make the 8 on the inside of their hand. So there's some ways that you can do that that are less obvious. Sometimes for older kids, they appreciate that more.
Sure. Awesome ideas, guys.
All right, so social supports, play and leisure skills. Some students need specific instruction on how to play with things correctly. I know it seems like they should know these things sometimes, but a lot of our kids really don't know how to play with things. Maybe that has to do with their life experiences and not having access to certain things when they were younger. Maybe it has to do with a potential learning challenge or developmental delay that they have. So you want to make sure that, especially in the younger grades, that you're reinforcing socially expected play skills and you teach in a controlled setting and then generalize to various settings. And don't forget about pretend play. What does that look like for older students? Oh my gosh. Even at the upper elementary level and middle school level, like kids don't know how to play things anymore. Okay. They play like these solitary games, right? They're video games and stuff like that. And we went outside to play kickball and like the kids didn't know how to play kickball. And I was like, who doesn't know how to play kickball? Oh my gosh, we have to teach this kid how to play kickball. And so that's huge. I mean, teaching them to play board games too has so many skills. Oh, I could do a whole training on games and how we should be playing more games. But definitely play and leisure skills and teaching them how to do this. How does that relate to prevention? If you're teaching kids how to play with each other, okay, you're going to have less conflict in the classroom. If they don't know how to play, you're going to see more problem behaviors when it comes to time where they have opportunity to interact with each other.
Absolutely. Mark said, play games with them, show them how to take turns, go over the rules, and of course, clean up afterwards, right? That's the whole sequence. All of it is so important to teach and practice. And like Lisa said, in those upper grades board games, even just hanging out, right? How to make comments or ask questions or further conversations about those things and appropriate ways and appropriate times to do that. Those are things that we may need to model for our students. All right, so communication strategies. All behavior communicates something. Okay, we've said that a couple of times during today's training. Behavior is communication. So most of the problem behaviors that we might see in our classrooms are the result of ineffective or inefficient communication of wants and needs. Okay, so our job is to teach our students the effective way or the correct way to communicate those wants and needs. So teaching communication skills should be a priority. Okay, so teaching our students to request and protest, determining whether the student can communicate vocally or if other supports are needed. Okay, it's important to keep in mind just because a student can speak doesn't mean that he or she can communicate vocally when in a state of escalation. So we talked about that a little bit before. When we are escalated, sometimes it is harder to say the things that we're feeling. Maybe I'm going to give my student the ability to write it down, right? To stop and think about it and just write it down. That could be a communication strategy that helps them to learn, okay, when I'm feeling this way, this is how I can communicate. Okay, and maybe some of our students that need assistance with communication, maybe using some of those visual supports, using those supports that Lisa and I went over earlier, like identifying where they're at on that 5-point scale or how that how they're reacting to a certain problem. Also, maybe our students that need some type of assistive technology or augmentative communication device to be able to tell you what it is that they're feeling or what it is that they're experiencing. So regardless of their ability level and communication level, giving all of our students a way to express how they are feeling in any certain situation. So this here is resources for some social skills lessons. So our team created tons and tons of social skill lessons for all grade levels. So your primary and secondary classrooms could benefit from these. If you go to Google Classroom and you search that code right there, it's the 3 REBSEI. There are tons and tons of resources. We also are frequently posting updates for any trainings or anything else that comes out for that, but those are where you can teach those skills, right? So we've done a ton for you, lots of modeling. So if you're like, hey, my students really need help working on identifying emotions, there's a social skill lesson for that. My students need help identifying, ways to stay organized in the classroom. Maybe for some of my upper elementary or middle school or high school teachers, there's social skill lessons for that. So looking at what's there, and there's tons and tons of resources that we can use there. Anything you want to add to that, Lisa?
No, that's great.
Real quick, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I probably used this book 15 years ago, maybe longer, and it's free. You can download it, PDF. It's called 101 Ways to Teach Children Social Skills. Completely free, the entire book. Great lessons, great examples, all age groups.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely look that up. Good resource to have. Thanks, Mark. All right, so we're going to go into de-escalation now. Let's pause for a second. Do you guys have any questions about all the stuff we talked about with prevention? Are you seeing how it connects across the types of kids that you teach, or do you have questions about that? Let's hash some of that out.
Mary used the one-on-one social skills last year. Great resource. Awesome.
We must be doing just such an awesome job, Lauren. They don't even have any questions.
No questions.
Look at that.
Thank
you.
So do you, Samantha.
All right.
You guys
So
think of
now,
something, ask us, please.
Now we're going to talk about de-escalation. Okay. So some signs of de-escalating behavior. I don't need to read everyone on here. I'm sorry, I said de-escalating behavior. Signs of escalating behavior. I love this little girl. Grr, this is my angry face. But guys, take a look at some of these things on this slide. I mean, all of these things are signs of escalating behavior. We're moving into that pre-crisis. We're moving out of that calm and stable functioning. We're moving into pre-crisis, and we might start to see some of these things happening, okay? Minor destruction of property, disruption, bothering others, off task, pencil tapping, putting their head down, things like that. And so our purpose of de-escalation, guys, is to remind students of the skills and strategies they have already been taught, okay? Coping strategies, replacement behaviors, communication skills. You already did it because you guys are awesome and you maximize calm and stable functioning and you did all the stuff that we already talked about today. So you have a huge toolbox of stuff that you can remind them of when you see signs of escalating behavior. And then you would provide extra prompting to assist the student in using those skills to de-escalate. Intervention should be focused on redirection and quick success, not introducing new things at this point in time.
So the goal of de-escalation is to get our students from a state of dysregulation to regulation. So how do we do that? Most of what you will do to de-escalate the behavior will loop back to the work you have already done in prevention. Okay, so this is what Lisa's talking about. You've taught it all in prevention. All you're doing in de-escalation is reminding and providing those prompts. We're not teaching new skills. We're referring back to all of that good stuff that you've already done in the prevention stage. So reacting versus responding. So this is where we talked about if we don't spend the time working on those prevention strategies, we're always going to be reacting to behavior. Okay, reacting to behavior is unproductive. When you react, you are giving away your power. When you respond, you are staying in control of yourself. Okay, so react, it's that first thing, this is how I'm going to react to the behavior. Okay, it could be short-sighted. It could include poor communication. It could include an overreaction, right? Because we're not planned ahead. We're not prepared. Where if we're responding to behavior, it is productive, okay? We're looking at the big picture. We're taking the time to think about those behaviors, to think about the things that are impacting those behaviors, and we're prepared to respond because we already know how to get to the next step. We're already practicing and we've already used those strategies in the past. So all we have to do is refer back to those strategies and we're responding to the behavior rather than those quick reactions, which can sometimes cause an even further escalation.
And I just want to point out here too, on the react side, this is where we're really inadvertently reinforcing behavior that we don't mean to. And guys, we're human. You're going to react sometimes. The key is when you have reacted to really think about it and prepare to respond in the next instance. So a lot of times the first time something outrageous happens in front of you, you will react and it's okay. That's our natural human instinct, okay? But when you can reflect on that and think about what you're going to do the next time, it's going to help you be more effective and ensure that you're not inadvertently reinforcing that behavior. So I'll give you a little quick story. So Lisa, the person who trains this training 18 million times, and by the way, I'm always self-reflecting on my own parenting and my own behavior analyst skills when I'm training this stuff. But I was thinking about, I was in a classroom, okay, and I was there helping with another kid that is having a bunch of behavior difficulties. And I've been in this classroom many times, so I know pretty much all the students, right? And there's a kid in there who apparently his attention tank was low. I always refer to kids having an attention tank like a gas tank. And when your attention tank is full, you don't do as many attention-seeking behaviors because your tank is full. But when your tank is empty, you need to fill it. So you do more attention-seeking behaviors to get more attention. That was a sidebar. Anyway, this kid's attention tank, not the one I was there for, but another kid in the classroom, must have been low that day. So we're all working with this other kid. There's a lot of attention going towards this other kid. And kid A, who typically behaves, just like pulls down his pants in the middle of class. And I look at him and I'm like, hey, you, I said his name. Pull your pants up. What are you doing? And the teacher just looked at me, and it was one of those things that, like, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, I want to put it back in. Like, I did not mean to do that, but I just reacted, like, in that moment. And she looked at me like, really, Lisa, you're the behaviorist here. I can't believe you just said that. You know he's doing that for attention. I just looked at her and I was like, I'm so sorry. So I'm telling you guys that story because reaction is normal. It's going to happen. It's going to happen even when you know all this stuff, right? And I just was not expecting that to occur in the classroom that day. And I totally reinforced his behavior and I felt bad about it. We laughed about it. We moved on. But that's just an example of reacting and thus providing reinforcement for something you didn't mean to do. So next time I went in that classroom, I was more prepared to respond.
There you go. Great use of your reflection skills.
Oh, yes, exactly.
All right. So some de-escalation strategies to try first. So when a behavior is likely to escalate, and you know your students, right? You are the expert on your students. You spend the most time with them. So you know when a situation might escalate. These are some things to try first. Let's achieve eye contact if possible. So if you can get near the student and get them to look at you, using the student's name, okay, and using proximity. So this is not a situation. If I see a student getting ready to escalate into a situation, I'm not going to be shouting their name across the classroom, right? I may get close. Now, it's important here to think about how close I'm going to get, because some of our students who may have experienced trauma or other situations, we don't want to get too close or approach them quickly or from behind without them having warning. But it's also not a situation that we want to be shouting across the classroom. So kind of think about that proximity in both situations, but getting close enough that you can have that calm conversation without needing to raise your voice, and making sure that they know that you're with them and you're there and you're understanding them. Okay, so using nonverbal signals or visuals. So maybe you have some pre-established signals or visuals that you can use to communicate with them, and using specific praise. So being very specific about what they're doing right in that moment. Maybe they're trying to use one of their strategies. I see that you're taking deep breaths. I love that you're taking your deep breaths, or I love that you're using your lazy 8 breathing, right? So these are some things. If I start to see a situation escalate, I might try these things as the very first to see if I can get that student to connect with me and start to de-escalate.
So these are some de-escalation strategies we're going to go through right now. Communication, assessing the situation, reflective listening, gaining success, assisting with coping skills, using alternate activities, and teamwork. So the first one is communication is key. So try to identify what the student is trying to communicate through the challenging behavior. So for example, if a student pushes another student who's working at the computer, I want you to think, is he trying to access the computer, function access to tangibles, right? Or is he trying to interact socially with the student, function attention, okay? Because that, knowing that or being able to hypothesize about that is going to help you with how to respond. Help prompt more effective communication. So if this kid's trying to access the computer, prompt communication for how to access that more acceptably. If they're trying to interact socially, prompt a more acceptable social interaction. You always want to use a matter-of-fact tone of voice when you're providing redirection, and be sure to reinforce the first instance of more acceptable communication. I like to talk about too, high quality versus low quality attention. And so going back to that matter-of-fact tone of voice when you're providing redirection should be a form of low quality attention. You're matter-of-fact, you're to the point, and then we use high quality attention, more animated, all of that for more correct behavior.
All right, so assessing the situation, we want to see what's going on in the situation and making sure that we are not doing anything to further escalate the situation. So the first one says be non-confrontational, right? So we talked about approaching the student, using that matter-of-fact tone of voice, making more start than stop requests. So we want to tell them what it is that we want them to be doing, okay? So not stop kicking your feet, stop banging the table, because what are they hearing? Kicking, banging, all of those negative things, right? So more of those start requests. So maybe reminding them of those de-escalation strategies. Maybe if they're escalated and pacing the classroom, asking them to have a seat, right? Providing those start requests, what do we want them to do? using a non-reactive response and a neutral tone of voice and facial expression. Okay, so we're not going to heighten ourselves because that could cause the student to continue to escalate. So think about that matter-of-fact tone of voice and making sure that we're not raising our voice, but keeping our facial expressions calm, keeping our tone calm. Okay, providing wait time. So we want to make sure we're not providing direction after direction after direction after direction, right? Provide that direction and wait. Give the student time to comply. Give them time to process the information that we may be asking them. Sometimes when we're in that heightened state, it takes more time to process. So give the direction, give that start request, and then provide them time. Maybe give them 30 seconds to a minute before you provide the next one. Okay, making structural or environmental modifications. So in the beginning, we talked about those people, places, and proximity, right? So are there things in the environment that I know that are affecting these behaviors right now that I can change? So maybe I can turn the lights down if it's an overwhelming situation, or maybe if we're in the cafeteria and I know it's really loud, I could take them with me to a quieter spot to help them de-escalate. So think about those things that are in the environment and what we can do to modify them. Okay, and then this one talks about during distance learning, we shouldn't need as many of these things, but still good things to think about. Always assessing the situation for safety and sometimes switching up the activity. So maybe it's what we're doing with them, maybe thinking of a different activity that we can work on, or asking questions to re-engage them. And then, of course, if they are in a distance learning situation, requesting that assistance from a caregiver if possible.
Reflective listening. Focus on feelings. Definitely show empathy for the student's situation, and using empathy statements paired with reflective listening is very effective. So first of all, remember that students are entitled to how they feel, even if their perspective is off on things, okay? And it's our job to listen and help them process those feelings productively. So it looks like you're sad today, using those I noticed statements. I noticed you this, or I noticed this happened. I'm sorry you feel that way. For our students with autism, try to avoid open-ended questions and offer choice statements instead. This could also be applicable to students who have significant language deficits and really struggle with having open-ended questions and that kind of reciprocal communication. You always want to ask clarifying questions, only the essential ones, so you're not like badgering or interviewing, because that can cause kids to shut down really. Ensure your body language and tone are non-judgmental. That's going to be really important, especially for our older students, so that they will be willing to kind of open up to you, and always just kind of always be listening, like this dog says right here.
And I think it's important to note, especially when we're talking about our older students, that the first time you try to engage in that reflective listening, they may not be open to it, but making sure they're aware that you're always there to listen and you're always open to have that conversation. Sometimes it's planting the seed, and the first time they end up in that escalated situation, they might not want to talk to you, but the way that you respond that first time may let them know in the future, hey, this is someone I can come and talk to, versus someone who continues to escalate the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to gain success quickly. So when we are in those situations, providing reasonable choices and options. So Lisa talked about some of those options before, but maybe we're giving them a choice. You know, do you want to go for a walk or go get a drink? Something quick that can be de-escalated, but also could be choices related to the things that they're working on. Responding to other students exhibiting the expected behavior. So notice what other students are doing in the classroom and being specific. So thank you so much for taking out your work and getting started. Anything like that. When the student does engage in an on-task response, making sure that you're acknowledging it and responding to it. Okay, so you know, I love that you went and got your drink of water and came back. Thanks for getting back on task, being very specific. In situations that are likely to cause escalation, immediately provide a choice or a replacement behavior that you want the student to exhibit. So here's an example. I know Tommy gets upset when computer time ends. So before I tell him time is up, I say, Tommy, computer time's almost over. When I ring the bell, you can say, oh man, and that's that replacement behavior. Okay, again, that's something that has to be taught. That was that example that Lisa gave when we're talking about responding to situations and it's a small problem, right? We can say, oh man, so before it happens, I know every time computer time is over that that's something that may cause an escalation. So I'm going to give that prompt ahead of time. Okay, we can also provide that prompt ahead of time. You know, if it's a non-preferred subject, maybe we're getting ready to write an essay and I know this specific student shuts down every time we're getting ready to write an essay. So beforehand, I'm going to provide a prompt. Hey, in about 15 minutes, we're going to do an essay, but you can just work on that first paragraph today and tomorrow we'll work on the next part, right? So instead of letting them get to that overwhelmed point, instead of waiting until there's a reaction and then we're trying to figure it out, let's do it ahead of time and provide those prompts. Providing several instructions that are easy for the student to have success with, and then building back to your original instruction. So this works really well for students with autism, but it works really well with a lot of different students. So if we're trying to get them to clean up their area, tell them touch your nose, touch your head, touch your ears, pick up the pencil, and we're just building that compliance. Okay, the same thing can be used if we're, you know, trying to clean up an area and then want them to return to their desk. So pick up your backpack, put it on the hook, come back and write your name, right? We're just giving those small steps, giving them that compliance and getting them to follow through with whatever direction we're providing.
Assisting with coping skills, use relaxation techniques, deep breathing, counting, stress ball. It allow them access to a calming space or provide sensory options for de-escalation. The key thing here about coping skills, guys, is it's stuff that you've already taught them, just like anything else. So, but they may need more assistance with utilizing coping skills when they are in pre-crisis. So keep that in mind. It might require some prompting, some modeling, maybe doing it with them in the beginning. We can't just assume because we taught coping skills and we remind them to use them when we're de-escalating that they'll be able to do it. So that assistance is going to be key for some of our students.
So using alternate activities, this is also a really great way when a student is escalated to try to slow it down and give them something else. So using movement activities, something that gets the student up and moving, right? So giving the student a job. This is something that I used to use frequently in my classroom. If I saw a student starting to get heightened or I knew a situation might be escalated, I might say to the student, hey, I need you to run an errand for me. Can you come take this note? And sometimes it would be a blank piece of paper that they would hand to the other teacher, and the other teacher would know that that meant they just needed a minute, and she might give them a pack of pencils to bring back to me, or she might give them, you know, a little task to do in her classroom before sending back. But giving them a job, giving them a place to go and then come back, maybe giving them that time to breathe. Okay, also taking a brain break. That could be an opportunity that you give them in the classroom. Providing an independent activity, so something that they can do on their own, whether that's a preferred activity, maybe, you know, in a high school setting, giving them a few minutes to listen to music to de-escalate, or taking the classroom pass and going to get a drink and coming back. Providing access to a quiet space, whether that quiet space is in your classroom or somewhere that they go and then come back quickly. Using a pre-arranged signal for the student to access a previously agreed on alternate activity. And the important part here is that previously agreed on in the pre-arranged signal, right? So we're not going to, at that time, try to talk through, oh, well, what can we do? How are you feeling, right? Right then and there, if you know when I'm escalated, this is something that works for me, maybe we have a signal, maybe it's this or this, whatever works for you in your classroom, and they show that signal, and all you have to do is nod your head, right? You don't have to stop teaching. You don't have to go over. You give them that acknowledgement. They can engage in that pre-arranged alternate activity for whatever that set amount of time is, and then come right back. Okay. Also redirect using that change of scenery. So that goes back to where we talked about giving them a job, maybe sending them on a walk, or asking them to do an errand for you.
And then teamwork makes the dream work. So you want to identify the resources on your campus to help you when needed and what types of things you might need help with. So recognize your personal limits. What are your personal limits? When this happens, this is my limit, and I know that I need help and assistance at that point in time. Identify your go-to people, okay? So sometimes it's the teacher next door, and you can have a little agreement worked out, like Lauren just said, bringing the blank piece of paper to another teacher, and the teacher knows this kid's in here for a reason right now. Could be someone on your team, could be an administrator, could be a support staff or professional on your campus. Sometimes you just need to tap out for a second so that you can, as Hector says in the chat, I love that, tap out, because if you're not going to be able to respond productively, then you need to have some assistance with that. And that's okay, guys, because we're human. All right. Set up a system to ask for help, though. So send the student on an errand we just talked about. You can buzz or walkie for assistance during traditional, brick and mortar schooling. And Mark says, don't take it personally. Definitely. Like sometimes kids are just going to respond better to you in some moments and better to others in other moments. And that's okay. So that's the point of having a team. All right, is to help each other sometimes, and whatever is going to be most effective is what we need to do, right?
Absolutely. All right, so planning and preparing. Practice how you will respond to challenging behaviors on a classroom in the classroom. Write it on a card and practice so that you don't have to respond. So that when you do have to respond, you are prepared and it's more automatic. Okay, so this is almost like that rehearsal practice that you can do. So what are you going to do? What are you going to say? And what kind of tone are you going to use? Okay, so think about in the example here, I'm going to pause, I'm going to square up and make eye contact with the student. What am I going to say? John, that's a demerit. I need you to put your phone away and eyes up here. What kind of tone am I going to use? Authoritative. Okay, so you can brainstorm what are different situations that I may experience in my classroom and what are some things that I can do and say and what tone of voice do I need to have so that I'm prepared ahead of time. And it's a good way for you to practice, whether it's something you do on your own or practice with, people on your team or other people in your grade level so that when you are engaging in those situations, it's more automatic and you're ready to go.
That's that responding versus reacting. And I know, guys, we don't use the word demerit. We got this from in a full day training. We usually play the little match mini video that goes with this. And that's why it says that. Okay, so we have arrived at our optimistic closure. We have shared a lot of information with you guys today. But we would love to know in the chat box, or you can unmute and share what your biggest takeaway from today's training is. And if you're watching this in the recorded version, please jot down your biggest takeaway as well. Yes, size of the problem chart. Love it. Ooh, yes, new strategies, eats, functions of behavior, my favorite.
Yeah.
Social behavior mapping, very good. Relationships, yes. Private events being an antecedent, yeah, that's huge.
Very good.
Prevention is going to eliminate the huge problems by nipping it in the bud, absolutely. Problem behavior, problem chart, yep. My size is not their size, yeah. Don't take it personally.
Take it personally, yes.
And listen, don't get hung up on consequence. I mean, really, I wish it wasn't ABC. I wish it was ABO. Think of it as an outcome. Too many people are worried about consequence being negative, and obviously now it's not if you didn't already. But don't get hung up on that term.
Great point.
Yes, thank you. Good point.
Trauma-informed focus. Yes, so important.
Well, thank you guys so much for your participation and telling us what your takeaways were. And I hope that if you're watching this on the recorded version that you have some great takeaways too, like some of the other ones that we read. I believe the next slide is our email addresses. If you have any questions, if you're participating live, don't go anywhere. We're going to stop the recording. First, wondering if you have any questions related to the content of the training. Then we will get into all the other things that you need to do to wrap this up if you're participating live, but that doesn't need to be on the recording. So do you have any questions related to the content of the training? All right. And remember, you can always email us. And if you're watching this recorded, please email us your questions as well. I'm going to stop the recording. And then for all of you who are live, we will continue